how liberals are quick to cry racism or oppression. How do you define racism? Or what's an example of something you find racist?
That's a big question. I think Jim Crow laws were racist. That was racist.
And in the modern context?
In the modern context, I can't think of a policy that is racist, but if somebody walks into this room right now and calls me the N-word, that's a racist term.
I really, really love this video because it really demonstrates something that I've observed in conservative media for some time. Conservative media loves nothing more than to talk about a race-baiting type of scenario, to talk about a situation where people throw that label racism on something the way right-wingers throw DEI or CRT or woke, just ambiguously against anything they don't like, right? And you ask them, what do you mean by woke? And they don't know. Well, right.
The destruction of normalcy and
anti-Americanism. You know, Al-Qaeda attacks American lives. Are they woke?
Well, maybe in some ways.
Are they a woke terrorist group?
So this is
just throwing around woke. You don't like something, it's woke, right? In the same way that the right wingers do that, left wingers, some of them will throw around the word racist, right? So a cop shoots someone. There's no evidence that the police officer is racist or it had anything to do with race. They will jump on top of it and make it race. They'll manufacture racism where there is none, right? Right-wing media loves to talk about race in that scenario. But anytime someone is actually racist, then it's not race baiting. It's a legit, crazy story. All of a sudden, right? So what's the impact? The impact is if you're watching conservative media, in your mind, racism is a thing of the past, right? Because the only time you ever hear about racism, it's some fake story made up by the liberals. So, your brain is just going to think, well, you're going to associate racism with fraud, right? And the only time you hear about racism, it's a fraud situation. And then because of your skin color and maybe where you live, you're not actually experiencing it. So in your real life, you're not seeing it. And the only time you ever hear it, it's some fake story that some liberal is talking about. And what are you going to think? It's not really a thing. But Candice Owens, she does not have the privilege of not being aware of racism, what it is and what it's like. I'm sure she's experienced it, right, from many different angles. The people who disagree with her politically, that I'm sure they throw her race in her face at her. She's out there being a public figure, so definitely, people are going to attack her from every different angle. And that includes some of them are going to attack her because of her skin color. In fact, isn't she the one that did, I don't know if it was a lawsuit or what it was, but there was something about somebody treated her some racist situation that happened to her, maybe as a teenager or young adult, something like that. And then she went to the NAACP and, you know what I mean? So she doesn't have the luxury of being oblivious to it. So why is it all of a sudden she's asked about it, she's clueless? Now, let me clarify some stuff because some people watching this video don't even get what just happened. She was asked to define racism and could not do so, right? That was what she was asked, to define racism. Now, think about this. Do you really think that Candice Owens is just this dumb, right? And we find that so many of these right-wing influencers or, commentators, so many of them are so problematic for so many reasons. Lack of morality, lack of integrity, just very, very dishonest, right? And here we have this person who, either she's super dumb, right? In 2024, as a woman with brown skin, doesn't, she struggles to define racism. Think about that. Let's be logical. Even living in a world where all the media that you're looking at is showing you all these fake, race baiting stories, right? Even with that, being the case, the idea that a brown skinned woman who had that situation that happened in her own life struggles to define what racism is. I mean, even seeing it fake all the time, she must know what it is, right? So, again, either she's that dumb that she actually doesn't know what it means, or she does know what it means, and if for some reason she doesn't want to say it. She finds it uncomfortable to discuss racism, right? Love to call out the left for calling out racism where it's not, right? The fake race baiting. Loves to talk about that. Let's talk about that all day long. But for some reason, right, what they're talking about is fake, But she can't lead by example and talk about the real racism, right? Not even to give an example of it, just to define it. You don't know what racism is? You're sitting there, I mean, it's like a tough question. She's there, So think about this. If she doesn't have a clear understanding of what racism even is, what qualifies her to talk about racial issues and to be critiquing others about what they're saying about racism? I mean, again, it's a very basic concept, right? Racism has to do with when you're putting the highest value in terms of what defines a person, the highest value you're putting is on their skin color. Right now, unfortunately, we usually think about racism from a negative standpoint. So even people who can better define racism don't realize that it's not always a negative, right? If you think that Asian people are good at math, that's racist, right? Because you're saying based on skin, right, you're attributing their potential abilities, right? Now, there's cultural reasons why you might think that, but the reality is there's nothing about being an Asian that makes you good at math, right? In terms of your skin. The skin doesn't make them good at math. Now, their culture might make them good at math, but that's not, when people say that, that's not what they're generally talking about, right? And then, the negative context would be, that people with brown skin tend to be violent, right? They tend to be not as smart, right? But whatever it is, if you're looking at someone's skin color, it goes both ways, right? I could be someone with my skin color looking at someone with a much lighter complexion than me, someone blonde eye, and I said blonde hair. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I said blonde eyes, and anyway, blonde hair and blue eyes. I might look at, people that look like that and assume them to be evil people and, very dishonest, whatever it is, but not based on the individual, right? I'm just basing it on, I see your skin and automatically I'm labeling you in terms of your personality, what you're capable of, and how you will behave, right? That is racist, right? That's the racist ideology, right? Another common way people look at racism would be in terms of superiority. One race is superior to the other. But again, if it's difficult for you to define racism, I mean, something that is very, very basic, this is something that, you'd expect the average person to know. So certainly somebody who's a political commentator who talks a lot about racial issues shouldn't be struggling to define racism. But she was like, and she says, she can't think of a policy. Was the question, could you name a racist policy? Why is she talking about policies? Why can't she just simply define racism, right? Instead she changed like a straw man. The thing is, could you define racism, like what it means to you? And then she switches it to, let me try to name a policy. Oh, I can't think of a racist policy. Oh, she give an example in the past. And this goes straight along. If my perception of what right-wing media does is accurate, what she's saying makes sense. Because what they want to do is pretend as if racism is a thing of the past, right? Racism is not an absolute statement, right? Dishonest actors, no, we don't deny that racism happens. Generally speaking, the what they try to promote is that racism is something that from the past, it's solved. Someone like me with my skin color, I can do whatever I want to do. There's no impact on my skin color that is sort of noteworthy. Let's put it that way. So, though most of them would not deny that there's no racism, they wouldn't say there's no racism. But they would say that it's such a small factor that it's barely noteworthy, right? So if that is the rhetoric that you're trying to push out, then it makes it uncomfortable for you to talk about defining racism and talking about it in terms of what's happening now, because your whole thing is that it's not really a thing anymore, right? So that would make sense why she would jump to Jim Crow, right? Because that's the message she's been putting out, right? She doesn't want to sort of expose the truth of what's really going on and what she's been attempting to do with her content. So it's like, oh, Jim Crow, right? That perfectly meshes with the idea that it's all in the past, right? And then she's put on the spot and she feels like she needs to say something else because he says in current context. So then she comes up with a ridiculous thing. I mean, not completely ridiculous, but mostly ridiculous. Like, let me just come up with a cartoonish idea of racism in terms of like someone just using the N-word. Right, that's obvious. Like, who can disagree with that? Someone walks in and calls her the N-word. I mean, clearly that's racist, right? Why this is good in terms of, and she's a pretty good propagandist. Not the best, but she's up there. Why this is really good is because, someone, a lot of times, racism does not involve something so raw as just like the N-word, right? That's generally not how it's going to work. And the way racism you would experience in modern times is, you send your resume, and they never even meet you, but they look at the resume, see your name is a black sounding name, and they toss your resume just based on that, right? No one used the N-word, right? They didn't even see you. You never even get to see these people. They just toss your resume. Black sounding name, right? Maybe you get an interview, and the person might feel more comfortable hiring someone who has a different complexion than you, right? And again, racism is not always a negative thing. Racism can go both ways. You can experience racism where you go and you can work out in your favor. You go and apply for a job, and there's someone who's better qualified than you who happens to have brown skin, but you get the job based on your skin color, right? Because they feel more comfortable with you. And you wouldn't probably realize this, but this is how racism would more be in a modern context. Another way that racism would occur in modern context would be not the N-word, but things like DEI, right? If I believe that brown-skinned people are inferior, and I'm not a brown-skinned person myself, ideally, in a modern context, I know how dangerous it is for me to go around saying the N-word, so I would look for alternatives. DEI is perfect, right? So if I were a so-called white person, and I saw some nasty black person, right, and I want to say something, but I don't want to expose myself to what I would if I said the N-word. I mean, N-word, again, everyone agrees, right? You say, if I got peach skin, right, or pink skin, and I go around and I call somebody N-word, they're gonna let me have it, right? So how can I express my disdain for this dirty black person, right, without getting in that kind of trouble? Well, I make comments like, yeah, that DEI mayor, right? I'm not gonna say that N-word mayor, right? Or those blacks, right? Instead of saying that, I would say a bunch of DEI people, doing whatever. That's not, I'm gonna code it, right? So it's perfect for her to say N-word, right? Because there it is. You can't say that she didn't. Like, oh, Candice Owens didn't erase, but she gave it an example right there, right? That's the perfect example, right? The kind of example where it's something that I don't think happens that much, right? The most way that you would experience racism today, I would guess, is not going to be in somebody using the N-word, right? So if you want to pretend like it's not really a thing, that's a perfect example to use, right? Something that's obscure, because your message is that it's an obscure thing. So point out an obscure example. And since you're lying, that's why you're struggling, right? Because you have to come up with some way to wiggle around and make sure whatever you're saying matches with your rhetoric, right? And that's all she's doing, man. That's all she's doing right there. And again, the classic straw man tactic of talking about policies, right? Because that's another thing that right-wing media likes to talk about, right? They don't want to talk about the policies from the past, right? It's not even like they'll at least really talk about that. They'd rather not even talk about what was happening in the past. They just kind of soft acknowledge, yeah, in the past there were things, but things are much better now. So let's stop talking about racism, because racism is really a thing of the past, right? So being that a lot of those overtly racist policies are no more, they love to focus on that. And the idea of changing the conversation to, can you tell me about a racist policy, is perfect, because her message is, those policies are things of the past. So I don't know any policy that might be racist, right? I'm not saying there is policies. I'm not saying there is or there isn't, right? But I'm just saying what she's saying and what her actions are matches with if she is in fact a fraud, right? Who has been helping right-wing media to push this rhetoric that racism is not really a thing. It's always just this race baiting thing, right? Like TYT. They love talking about TYT, because TYT, I don't think they've been doing as much now, but they've been doing so much race baiting for so long, right? There's been so much dishonest reporting on their behalf in terms of making everything about race. And, right-wing media loves to highlight and focus on that and ignore the actual real problem, right? And if that is their game and she's part of that game, it would make sense that she would be like, racism, whoa. Well, somebody called me the N-word. Bitch, get out of here, man. This is Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well.